Hi everyone, I'm Tina. I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all to part 2 of personalising your invoice layout in Sage 50 accounts. The first webinar on this topic concentrated on the common amendments you can make to personalise both the top and bottom of your invoices. The focus of today's session is to explore the middle section of the invoice to help you understand which sections in the layout you need to affect if you'd like to make any changes. Some housekeeping before we get going, and you will be familiar with this if you've attended any of our webinars before. You'll notice you'll be automatically muted by GoToWebinar, which just means you can't physically speak to us during the session. You do have the option to ask questions though, which can be submitted via the questions panel on the right-hand side. I have Abby, Jackie, Michael and Rachel joining me today to answer your questions. And while we do always try and answer all questions during the session, sometimes it's just not possible. So if for any reason you don't have your question answered today, please take a look in the Sage Help Centre or contact our support team for further help. There are some handouts available for you to download during the session via the handouts icon on the right. These will also be available after the session in Sage City, along with a link to the session recording and the top questions asked today. So watch out for an email in around an hour or two with the links. So on the agenda for today, I'll explain a bit about why there are so many sections in the middle of the invoice layout and demonstrate an easy way of identifying which sections on the layout are affected, depending on the type of data entered in the invoice. Now, there are a lot of different invoice scenarios, and I've put the ones I'll be covering with you today in white on the agenda. So I'm hoping that one or more of these will apply to you, and I'll be demonstrating some of the most common amendments requested as we go through the different types of invoice. And finally, I'll touch on where you can get further support. So let's start by looking at the different types of section on an invoice layout. So before adding any objects to your invoice layout, you need to consider the following. So what do you want to add? Is it a text box? Is it a data field? Or is it both? Where you want it to appear. So which section or sections do I need to impact? And more importantly, do I have space on the layout to add it? And then how do you want it to look? Does it look like the rest of the objects on screen? I'll start by focusing on the where in this part of the session, because this will be dictated by the type of data you enter in the invoicing and credits module in the software. I'll then show you how you can make amendments to the right sections on your layout in Report Designer. So on this slide, it shows us the middle area of an invoice layout. Now, most of the invoice layouts in the software contain 12 sections, which are numbered at the left of each section bar. There are a few exceptions where a layout may contain more sections than this, so please be aware that there may be differences between the layouts available. On the slide, I've deliberately excluded sections 1 and 12 because I covered these in part 1 of the webinar. So if you'd like more information on these sections, I'd really recommend you watch the webinar recording for part 1, which is available in the Help Centre. Now, you may have looked at the middle sections of a layout before and thought, why are there so many of them? And I certainly wouldn't blame you for not knowing where to go from here. So the reason for so many sections isn't to confuse you, I promise, and I'll give you a bit of background on this. So historically, Sage 50 accounts only had the ability to create either a product invoice using items selected from the products module, or a service invoice where you would just enter free text. So when it came to printing these invoices, you had to use a different layout for each type. So you had to select a product invoice layout to print a product invoice and a service invoice layout to print a service invoice. Now, as the software has expanded and improved over the years, extra invoicing functionality was introduced. So some examples would be mix and match invoicing, where you can add both product and service items on a single invoice. Quotations and pro formas are more features that have been introduced. And another one would be net value discounts, where you can apply a total discount to the invoice rather than against each item line. So if every time the software improved, we added more new layouts using just that functionality, it would make it even more difficult to find a layout to suit. So we've kind of created these invoice layouts for a bit of a one-size-fits-all scenario. And that's the reason why there are so many sections. So what I'm going to explain to you today is which sections in the invoice layout apply to the type of invoice data you enter in the software. Now, the best way I've found to explain this is by numbering each section with a text box to correspond with the number of the section shown in the grey section bar. So this way, when the invoice is previewed, we can see exactly which sections are being picked up for the type of invoice we've created. So I've added an example of a previewed invoice on the right-hand side, which we can see is only picking up data from sections 1, 5, and 12. So I'm going to use this layout today to help illustrate each point. The layout's based on the A4 plain paper invoice, which is suitable for both print and email purposes. Now you might be thinking, why in the previous slide did my invoice only display sections 1, 5 and 12? So why did none of the other middle sections print? So each of the middle sections on the layout has a filter applied to that section, meaning that only if the data matches the filter in this section will the content of that section print. And this is essentially how the invoice layouts work. So I've added a couple of example sections to the slide so you can see there are filters actually applied. I won't be going into detail on any section filters today because it's more advanced, but if you are interested in knowing more about these, there are some useful articles in the Help Centre which I've added links for to the slides. So let's look at the different types of invoice data that can be entered. Remember, not all examples will be relevant to everyone, so just think about which ones apply to you. So I'm just going to switch my screen now and go over to my demo. So hopefully you should all be able to see my Sage 50 Accounts software now. Okay, so I've created several different types of invoice record for this demonstration, and I'm going to start off with the very common product invoice. Now I've got two product invoices that I'm going to show you for this example in my list, which are 86 and 87. So I'm going to select them both. And then I'm going to click on the print icon from the top of the screen. This is going to take me into my invoice layouts, and we can see my test layout has already been marked as a favorite. So I'm just going to click on preview from the top. On the first product invoice, in the preview, I can see that only section 1, section 5, and if I scroll down a bit, section 12 are being picked up from the many sections available in the layout within Report Designer. Now, the first and last sections will appear on every invoice, so you will see sections 1 and 12 in every example I show you today. But it is the other sections I'm going to be focusing on. So let's scroll down to the second of the two product invoices. Now we can see that this invoice has picked up some extra information because I've got section 1, 5, 6, 7, and again, if I scroll down, 12 showing. So the difference with this invoice is that data has been entered in the comment 1 and comment 2 fields. Comment 1 has been picked up in section 6 on the layout, and comment 2 in section 7. And note how the second item contains data only in the comment 2 field. But there's no white space between the product details and comment 2. So meaning that even if comment 1 is not populated, you aren't actually wasting any space on the invoice. So I'm just going to close the preview, and also I'll close the layouts window. And then I'm just going to open Invoice 86 to show you the data being pulled through. So if I have a look at the first line item, so we can see there's nothing entered in either comment 1 or comment 2 for the first line item. And it's the same for the second. If I just close this and open invoice number 87 and do the same, if I click on the first line item, there's my comment 1 data and there's my comment 2 data. And then if I open the second line item, you can see comment 1 is empty and there is the data in comment 2 only. So what I can gather from this demonstration from a product invoice is if I need to make a change to a product item line, I need to be looking at amending section 5 of the layout in Report Designer. So I'm just going to close the invoice and I'll just highlight these two invoices again. Now we're often asked to add the product code to the invoice layout. This doesn't appear on the layout as standard, and it's purely due to the number of objects on the layout already. So what you'll find is often when you want to add an extra data field to a section, you either have to delete or resize objects so a new one can be added. So I know what I want to add to the layout. I want to add the product code. I don't know where I want to add it on the layout into section 5. But how do I know which data field I need to add? To help you with this, there's a brilliant interactive article in the Help Centre, which I've added a link for to the slides. Now, I reference this article in almost every Report Designer session I run because it's so good. And I'll show you how you can use this article to help you find the data field you need. I'm going to open that article now, so you should be able to see that now on screen. So if I just scroll down, this is a graphical representation of Sage 50 accounts. So I know the product code is shown on the invoice record itself. So on the article, if I click Invoices and Credits, and then New Invoice, and then if I hover over the product field, it tells me the field in Report Designer is Invoice Item Stock Code. Invoice item being the table and stock code being the data field. So now I've got this information, I know exactly which field I need to add to the layout. So I'm just going to close this article for now. So let's go back into Sage, and I'm going to go back into Report Designer to see what changes we need to make. So I'm going to go back into Print, and then I'm going to click Edit to edit my invoice layout. So let's start by looking at section 5. So in here, it currently looks quite busy at the minute. Remember, if I hover over any objects in this section, I can see the table and the variable being used. Bit of a tip for you. If it looks like you don't have much room to add something into a section, preview the layout first. So if I click on Preview at the bottom of Report Designer, I'm going to look at the data showing in section 5. So if I just scroll down. So in section 5, I do actually have a bit of white space. So that's between the end of the description and the start of the unit price. So I just need to make a couple of adjustments in Report Designer to create some room to allow me to add the product code. So I'm going to go back into Report Designer. And what I'm going to do is to make this description field in section 5 a bit smaller so I can add the product code to the left of it. Now, the description field looks a bit funny in this layout, and this is because there are actually two description fields, one on top of the other. Now, only one of these will ever print when previewed. So what I'm going to do is just make sure I resize both of these fields. So to resize the first description field, I'm going to click on it. Then I'm going to click and drag one of these boxes at the left-hand side over to the right so the object becomes smaller. So I'll just do that now. So you can see object's not moving. I'm just basically resizing it. Once I've resized it, I can click release, and there we can see the newly sized description. I can now see the second description sitting underneath. So I'm going to do the same for that. So I'll click on it, hover over at the left-hand side, click and drag. I've now created some space to add the product code. Now, if you find you can't see the other data fields in the section now, you can actually change the order of data fields within a section. So what I want to do is send this description to the back. So I'm just going to right-click on it. I'm then going to select order and then click send to back. And you can see now, I can see my unit price, net amount and VAT values on there again. Now, before I add my new product code field, I'm also going to move comment 1 and comment 2 a bit further to the right, just so they're sitting directly underneath the description. If I left those where they were, any comment data that I might enter would basically appear to the left of the description. So I just want to really keep things nice and tidy. So I'm just going to move these along. And again, if you struggle with the mouse control, remember you can use your direction arrow keys on the keyboard to move objects as well. So I'm now ready to add my new product code data field. To do that, we're going to select Add Data Field from the toolbar at the top of the screen. I'm then going to move the mouse into the blank area I've created in section 5, which is here. And you can see that the mouse pointer is now a plus sign indicating I'm going to add something. I don't want you to worry too much about the positioning because you can always move it later. So if I click once, a new window appears for me to add the data field. Now the article confirmed the data field I need is invoice item stock code. So I'm going to expand the invoice item table, and the list of available data fields for that table appears in alphabetical order. So I've got another tip for you. To save scrolling through the list of fields, I'm going to press the letter S on the keyboard to take me to that area in the list. And then I can just carry on scrolling until I find stock code. Once I've found it, I'll just click on it and then I can click OK. And then we can see the field is now added. So now I can either drag and drop the field into the correct position or use the direction arrow keys on the keyboard. So I'm just going to get rid of that and recap that again for you. So it's Add Data Field, click into the section on the layout, expand the table, locate and then select the data field, click OK, and then you can reposition. So let's save the changes. So I'll just click on the disk at the top left of the screen and then preview the layout. So what we can see now is that the product code is appearing on the invoice, but we don't currently have a title for product code. We can still see that the title for description is still in the same place as the description fields that we resized earlier. So I need to do a little bit more tweaking. So I'm going to go back into Report Designer. So I'm just going to click Edit at the top so I can edit from Preview. I'm going to move this description title over to the right so it lines up with the description data field in section 5. So again, I can click and drag, or this time I'm just going to use my arrow keys on the keyboard just to quickly move that along. So I now have space to add my title for product code. Now, the easiest way to do this on a layout is to copy and paste an existing text box and then just change the text. So what I'm going to do is to copy the description text box and I'm going to paste it into this little bit of space over here. So I'm going to click on it and then I'm going to right click on it and then select copy, or the shortcut Control and C works too. To right click into a bit of blank space and then select paste. And again, you can see there's a shortcut key, Control and V for that. So I'm just going to paste and then I'm going to move the text box into the right position. Now, to amend the text, you can double click on a text box, which will take you into edit mode. So if I double click, you might be able to see there's a cursor flashing between the P and the T in the description. I can now delete that text and then basically type in the new text. So I'll just type in product code and then click away. So again, I'm going to save my changes at the top left. And then when I preview the layout, we should now see that the product code title and data field appear in the right place on the layout. So let's move on to a service invoice. So instead of using product codes, you can just type in free text to describe what it is that you're selling. So I'm just going to close the preview screen and the layouts window. And this time I'm going to open Invoice 88, which is a service invoice. So if I open the line item on the invoice, I can see I have both an item description, so that's the smaller field at the top, and I have item details, which is a larger free text field, and both of these contain different text. So I'm just going to preview this to show you how this appears by default. I'm going to close out of the invoice, go back to print, and then I'm just going to click preview again. So this time in the preview, I can see section 1's being picked up. Rather than section 5, the service invoice looks at section 4. And again, if I scroll down, obviously section 12's there as well. If I just zoom in a little bit there, of the two fields I had data entered in on the line item, only the line item details field shows in the preview screen. Now, because service invoices provide you with two fields in which you can enter data, we're often asked if both fields can be shown on the invoice, rather than just the field for details. And there's a Help Centre article with the steps you need to achieve this, which I've added onto the slides for you, but I'm going to demonstrate to you how you do this now. So I'm just going to go back to the articles. So this is the article that I've put a link for into the slides. And if I just scroll down to the resolution, it tells me I need to edit the layout and I need to edit the data field that currently shows the details for the service item. And this is called service text, and it tells me it's in the details section. So it's pointing me to exactly where I need to go. What I then need to do is to get rid of the current text in there and basically replace it with the text that's shown against invoice layout. So don't worry about the content of the text. It's simply a case of copying and pasting to achieve the result that you need. Now, if I needed to do this on either a sales or a purchase order layout, you can see I've got a sales order layout text and a purchase order layout text further down. So I would just select those instead. So I've got my text highlighted. So I'm just going to right click on that and then select copy. to copy it to the clipboard. So I'm done with this article now, so I'm just going to close it and go back into Sage 50 accounts. So remember, I can get straight into Report Designer from Preview by clicking Edit from the Preview screen. And remember, I can also hover over data fields to actually confirm what the data field is. So it told me I needed to go to the details section, which is section 4. And then if I hover over this, we can see that it's called service text. So it's this data field that I need to amend. So I'm now going to double click on service text. That opens the expression editor. So I'm going to get rid of this text and I'm going to paste in the text that I copied. So to quickly get rid of this, I can just click on this little clear button at the bottom left. Text's gone. I can now right click in the window and then select paste, and that will paste in the text I copied from the article. So once I've done that, I can click OK at the bottom. I'm now going to save the changes, and then I'll close Report Designer. So when I preview this invoice, I should be able to see both the description and the details of the service item line appearing. So I'll just preview that now. If I just maximize that and zoom in a little bit. So before, all I could see was the line that said enter your service item details here. But now you can see we have the description there as well. And that's one of the really common calls that we get on service invoices. Now, if you create product invoices that contain both product line items and service line items, when you preview the invoice, you'll see the same sections affected as these first two examples we've seen for separate product and service invoices. So I'm going to show you another invoice, which I've got prepared, which is invoice number 89. So I'm just going to open that. And on this invoice, we have a product line for PC Combo Pack 4. And we also have a service line for installation. So when you're selecting the product going from the drop down, it says that that's a service line underneath free stock. So we know this is in effect a mix and match invoice. We've got a product and a service item line on here. So I'm just going to close this and then go back to print. And again, I'm going to preview it. Zoom in a little bit. So when I preview this, we can see section 5 appears with the product item line for PC Combo Pack 4, and section 4 appears with the service line item details. Now at the minute, I can see my service text is sitting under the product code heading rather than the description. So what I'm going to do is just move this along so it's actually sitting in the right place. So I'm going to edit the layout. I'm going to go down to section 4, and I'm just going to move the service text fields just a little bit further to the right. So again, click and drag or use the arrow keys on the keyboard. And again, I'm just going to send that to the back. So I'm not hiding any of the other data fields there. So if I just save that now, close out, and then if I preview this again, we can see that the service item description is now sitting in the right place. So these examples of invoices are by far the most common requests we receive. So it's how to make changes against either a product line item and or a service line item. Now there are other examples I'll show you that affect other sections on the layout. So just so you can see how they all work. So we'll take a look at how credit notes work. So credit notes are very, very similar to invoices. You're just posting the opposite data. So I've got a couple in my data. So I'm just going to close and go back to my list. And you can see my credit notes on the main list are in red. So I have credit note number 90, which is a product credit note, and I've got number 91, which is a service credit note. So with both of these selected, I'm going to go back to print, and then I'm going to preview the layout. So exactly the same as invoices. So the product credit note is using section 5 for the line item data. And if I scroll down to the service credit note, we can see that's using section 4. And again, we've got both the description and details there because that's the amendment I just made in the previous example. So you can see your credit notes, treat them in exactly the same way as if you were making a change specifically for an invoice. Now, when previewing either quotations or pro forma invoices, you'll see an extra section to those we've seen so far. So neither quotes nor pro formas are classed as a VAT invoice. And because of that, a message needs to appear to confirm this. So I'm just going to close out of the layouts again. And I'm going to highlight this time invoice 92, which is a quote, and invoice 93, which is a pro forma. And I'm going to go back to preview the layout again. So into print, then I shall preview. So this is my quotation. So in the preview, we can see the text, note, this is not a VAT invoice, and that's being pulled through from section 2 on the layout. So if you wanted to make any change to that text on the invoice, you would need to make sure when you edit the layout, you're making the changes to section 2. Okay, and if I go down, I can see this is the pro forma. And again, I've got the text there. This is not a VAT invoice, section 2. So I'm going to go back into the invoice list. And this time I'm going to open invoice number 94. So again, this is just a normal product invoice and I've got one line on it. But on this invoice, I've entered data in the net value discount area at the bottom. So if I just click on that, I've got a description, details, I've got a comment 1 field, and I've got a comment 2 field as well. Okay. So again, I'm going to preview this. And again, I'll just zoom in a little bit. So we can see the item line, because this is a product invoice, is picked up from section 5. But I've got the extra sections in here, section 8, 9, and 10. So in section 8, I can see the net value discount description, rate, and value. Section 9 contains comment 1, and section 10 contains comment 2. So this is a bit similar to the product invoice that we looked at a bit earlier. So for the last example today, I'm going to open invoice 95. Again, this is a product invoice. I'm just going to click OK to get rid of that message. Now, any invoice raised with data entered in the payment section of the invoice, so I've just clicked on payment down the left-hand side, where either a deposit or the full amount has been paid in advance, will also appear on the invoice layout, and it will confirm both the amount paid and if any further balance on the invoice remains. So here we can see I've paid £368, but I still owe £1,000. So I'm just going to show you the layout. So I'll preview the layout again. So again, this time, because it's a product invoice, we're looking at the line items from section 5, but we've got another new section coming into play, which is section 11. And section 11 shows us the amount paid and also the amount remaining. Now, by default, this appears directly under the last line item. So it's appearing directly on kind of line 3 underneath these 2 line items here. If I had 10 on the page, it would basically appear as line 11, okay? Now, if for any reason you don't want the amount paid to show here, what you can do quite easily is move it to make it appear directly above the totals on the invoice instead. So I'll just show you how to do that now. So I'm going to click on Edit to get into Report Designer. And I'm going to have to scroll down to find my section 11, which is there. So with section 11 selected, I'm going to open the Properties pane at the right-hand side. And the property I'm looking for in the Behaviour section is called Align to Bottom, which is currently set to false. So if I change Align to Bottom from false to true, and then I'm going to save my changes, and then close Report Designer. When I preview the layout, the amount paid and amount due no longer appears directly under the last line of the invoice, but it appears directly above the totals instead. So you might not be using that payment feature. So if you don't, this one doesn't apply to you. If you do use that payment feature in the invoice record, it's just a matter of which position you prefer. Do you want this data to show underneath the last line of the invoice, or would you rather show it above the totals? So that's the demo done for today. I'm going to go back to the slides just to recap what each of the layout sections achieve. So I'll just change my screen. And we should be back to the slides now. So the table on this slide summarises the purpose of each of the sections in an invoice layout. The only one I've not explained today is section 3. And this section's actually switched off by default. So regardless of what data is entered on your invoice record, you'll never see section 3 appearing because it's turned off. Just to give you a bit of background, we used this section in the past as a workaround to show the description for service line items. But this workaround has now been replaced with the much easier method I demonstrated to you earlier in the session. So that was the bit where I copied and pasted some new text from the article into the service text field. So in addition to the links to the articles I've shown you today, I've also added links to the Reporting Support Hub in the Sage Help Centre and a link to all you need to know about our report design service. So that's if you need us to design a report or a layout for you. So hopefully this session has given you more of an understanding as to A, why there are so many sections on the invoice layout, and B, which sections apply based on the invoice data you enter. So by far the most common sections you'll be amending in the middle of the invoice will be section 4 for service items and section 5 for product items. So we have some other webinars running this week. We've got some credit control webinars hosted by Michael, the bad debt sessions tomorrow at 11 AM, and he's running aged reports tomorrow afternoon at 2 PM. So please come along if you want to find out more on those. Later on this month, we've got some more new webinars scheduled for you, including fixed assets and depreciation, fuel scale charges, and I'll be doing another report designer session for you on groups and sections. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Please feel free to stay around for the next few minutes if you're waiting for an answer to a question or if you've got anything further to ask. If you've got what you need and want to leave the session, I'd just like to thank you for joining me today. And if you can spare a minute to complete the exit survey for me, that would be very much appreciated. Remember, you'll receive an email in around an hour or so with links to today's content, so you can revisit what I've shown you today if you'd like to. So I'm just going to pop myself on mute now to help with any unanswered questions. Okay, it looks like we're now up to date with the questions, so I'll close the session very shortly. I'd just like to thank Abby, Jackie, Michael and Rachel for their help today, and thank you all again for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all on a future session very soon. Take care.